Coming up on this Wednesday edition of Newsline at noon, the nominee to head U.S. Forces Korea says it will push ahead with a plan to transfer Washington's wartime operational control of Korean troops to Seoul in 2015, despite South Korea's request to postpone the handover. While there's still no word from Pyongyang about the final round of talks to decide on the fate of the shuttered inter-Korean factory zone, South Korean civic groups, with approval from Seoul, will start sending humanitarian aid to North Korea, totaling more than $1.4 million US. Plus, Bradley Manning, the U.S. soldier who leaked hundreds of thousands of classified documents to the WikiLeaks website, has been found guilty of multiple charges, including espionage, but not of aiding the enemy. These stories and more on Newsline at noon.
Where's the best place for bibimbap?
Les Jeux Olympiques d'hiver se dérouleront-ils à Pyeongchang?
هل أنتم حقاً سابع أكبر مصدر في العالم؟
この歌手は誰ですか？你好，最近哪部电视剧的人气最旺？
Korea is attracting interest from around the world. The more you know, the more you want to know. Dynamic Korea.
Thanks for joining us. You're watching Newsline at noon. I'm Choi You-sun in Seoul.
Very good to have you with us. I'm Mark Broom. The nominee to become the head of the U.S. forces in Korea says he supports the U.S. government's plan to hand over wartime operational control to Seoul in 2015 as scheduled, despite Seoul's call for flexibility.
The South Korean government believes it'll be difficult for its military to be fully ready for the transition by the target date. Our Kim Young-gil has our top story.
Lieutenant General Curtis Scaparrotti said at his Senate confirmation hearing on Tuesday that he plans to follow through with the scheduled timeline for the wartime operational control transfer in December 2015 if he is appointed to lead the U.S. Forces Korea.
Yes, I do agree with the timetable. It is a bilateral agreement, Strategic Alliance 2015, to turn over operational control by December of 2015.
The Lieutenant General said moving forward with the plan will pave the way for Korea's enhanced combat readiness, but emphasized that the Korean military will have to meet a detailed set of requirements by the agreed-upon date. The question of whether Korea should retake operational control of its troops is still a politically controversial issue in the country. South Korea handed over wartime operational control of its troops during the Korean War, but agreed to retake it in April 2012. Seoul asked for a delay to 2015 in 2010, which the U.S. accepted, and Seoul asked for another delay earlier this year. South Korean military officials are hoping to postpone the transfer again, as they believe it may be difficult for the South Korean military to be fully ready for the transition by the target date. Seoul and Washington are holding talks on the matter this week. Kim Young-gil, Arirang News.
Private humanitarian aid groups here in South Korea will send food and medicine for children in the north from today. This comes as Seoul awaits an answer from Pyongyang on its final proposal for talks on reopening their joint business park. Our Hwang Sung-hee has the details.
5 South Korean civic groups that received approval from the South Korean government earlier this week began sending humanitarian aid to North Korea on Wednesday. The organizations will send around $1.4 million worth of medicine and food for young North Korean children throughout next month. Recent surveys by the United Nations show more than 1 in 4 North Korean children under the age of 5 suffer from chronic malnutrition. Figures also point to rising infant mortality rates in the impoverished state in recent years. The current rate is more than 6 times higher than that of the South. Seoul's seemingly generous gesture comes a matter of days after the two Koreas walked away from talks on reopening their jointly run factory zone in the north. South Korean President Park Geun-hye has stressed humanitarian aid to North Korea will be dealt with separately from political issues. But the government's plan to approve private shipments of aid was announced as South Korean Unification Minister Ryu Gil-jae made what he called the last offer for talks to the North regarding the Kaesong industrial complex. North Korea has yet to respond. The two Koreas have held 6 rounds of working-level talks this month on ways to reopen the business park, but Pyongyang has not provided the security guarantees the South has been looking for to restart operations there. The factory zone has been shuttered for more than 3 months since the North unilaterally withdrew all of its workers amid an escalation of inter-Korean tensions. Hwang Sung-hee, Arirang News.
South Korea's largest conglomerate, Samsung Electronics, keeps renewing its profit and sales record, but this doesn't seem to be trickling down on the nation's economy. One big reason is that Samsung is making many profitable products overseas. Hwang Ji-hye has more. Samsung Electronics has announced major investment plans after the tech giant last week posted a record profit of $8.5 billion in the second quarter of this year. It plans to spend a record 24 trillion won, or roughly $21 billion to expand and update its production facilities this year, up around $1 billion from last year.
Samsung is increasing investments in next-generation growth engines. This will prompt other Korean large companies to promote investment.
The problem, however, is that these investments aren't likely to boost economic activities in Korea in a major way. That's because the bulk of these new spendings will be focused on expanding its factories overseas, particularly in China. Samsung allocated 1/3 of the $21 billion investment spending for this year to build a flash memory chip factory at Xi'an, China, and an additional $3 billion to build a display panel factory in another Chinese city. And Korea accounts for less than a quarter of the company's investment plan this year. Experts say with Samsung and many of local exporters building their new factories overseas, their prosperity will have less and less impact on the local economy. Hwang Ji-hye, Arirang News. Japan's education minister has heavily criticized a banner unfurled by Korean soccer fans during an East Asian Cup match against Japan on Sunday, which carried a message criticizing Japan's unwillingness to acknowledge its wartime atrocities. Speaking at a press conference Tuesday, the Asahi Shimbun reports Hakubun Shimomura said the banner calls into question the standards of the Korean people. This comes a day after Japan's Deputy Prime Minister Taro Aso made comments linking Japan's constitutional revision to the Nazi regime, stirring controversy over his view of history. He also expressed support for visits to the controversial Yasukuni War Shrine, which is seen by many as a symbol of Japan's wartime aggression. The Japanese government has flatly turned down a ruling by a Korean court that a Japanese firm compensate Koreans who were forced into labor during Japan's colonial rule in the early 20th century. In response to the Busan High Court's decision Tuesday, Japan's Chief Cabinet Secretary Yoshihide Suga reiterated Tokyo's position that all compensation issues between the two countries were resolved in a bilateral settlement agreement in 1965. Earlier, the Busan court ordered Mitsubishi Heavy Industries to pay 5 Korean victims $71,000 each for forcing them to work in harsh conditions without pay. The ruling follows the Seoul High Court's decision earlier this month that Nippon Steel and Sumitomo Metal Corporation compensate 4 victims by $90,000 each. And despite strong opposition from Japan, a city in California has set up a memorial honoring the thousands of young women who were forced into sexual slavery by Japanese soldiers during World War II. Our Kim Min-ji reports.
Glendale City on Tuesday unveiled a monument honoring the victims of Japan's wartime use of sexual slaves, becoming the first memorial to be set up overseas. The statue is a replica of the peace monument Korean civic leaders set up across the road from the Japanese embassy in Seoul. As the monument was unveiled, a smile appeared on the face of Kim Bok-dong, a victim of sexual slavery.
Before we die, Japan needs to come forward and offer an official apology and reparation.
After a great deal of persuasion from Korean community groups, the monument was installed in Grandel City Park as part of efforts to remember the inhumane acts committed by Japanese soldiers during the war.
The campaign was set up thanks to the American people and their contributions.
However, the installment did not go smoothly as the Japanese government and Japanese American residents strongly opposed the establishment. Hundreds of citizens wrote opposition emails, while the Consular General in Los Angeles even sent an opposition letter, saying Japan has provided sufficient reparations to its war victims. Glendale City, which has designated July 30th to honor the so-called comfort women, said the installment is meaningful as the residents now understand the correct history.
This is for them. This is one to educate the public about what took place, but also a tribute and a monument to what they had to endure.
The statue will represent the violation of human rights and horrific acts committed by the Japanese military. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
For your fill of Korean and international news, join Choi You-sun and Mark Broom every weekday at lunchtime. Newsline at noon.
Session this Wednesday and vote on the government restructuring bills.
He will still almost definitely go to prison and for a very long time, but U.S. intelligence leaker Bradley Manning has been acquitted of charges of aiding the enemy, the most serious charge he faced for leaking classified military and diplomatic documents to WikiLeaks website. And Na Young-kyung has the details.
Bradley Manning was found not guilty of aiding the enemy, but he has been convicted of 20 lesser charges. On Tuesday, 25-year-old Manning, who was arrested in 2010 for leaking hundreds of thousands of classified documents to the WikiLeaks website, was found guilty of charges including espionage, theft, and computer fraud. He could face a maximum of up to 136 years behind bars. Human rights group Amnesty International argued the charge of quote-unquote aiding the enemy was not evident in this case due to a lack of evidence that Manning intentionally tried to harm his country. Manning supporters think the verdict was too tough on the former U.S. Army soldier.
People like Bradley can't stand up and tell us what our government is doing when it's wrong, ostensibly wrong. Then we're in a lot of trouble.
Among the materials Manning sent to WikiLeaks were videos of a 2007 attack by an American Apache helicopter that killed a dozen people in Iraq, including some Reuters news staff. It also includes battlefield reports in Iraq and Afghanistan and diplomatic cables between Washington and other embassies containing state secrets. Manning's collection of documents were the catalyst of the WikiLeaks website and boosted the profile of its founder, Julian Assange.
It is a dangerous precedent and an example of national security extremism. It is a short-sighted judgment that cannot be tolerated, and it must be reversed.
Assange called for a full acquittal for Manning and said his case may affect similar cases like the one related to Edward Snowden, the CIA whistleblower who leaked details of several top-secret U.S. mass surveillance programs to the press. The military judge for Manning's case, Colonel Denise Lind, said she would release a written statement of her ruling at a later date. Manning's sentencing hearing starts on Wednesday. Na Hyun-kyung, Arirang News.
Negotiators from Israel and Palestine have given themselves a 9-month timeline to try and broker an agreement on ending their decades-long conflict. The two sides wrapped up their 2-day talks in Washington Tuesday with U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry, who helped arrange the meeting, saying discussions had been constructive and positive. Kerry said he could understand, but couldn't share the view of critics who say the talks have no chance of success. The major obstacles in the way of a stable agreement are the issues of borders, Israeli settlements in the West Bank, Palestinian refugees, and the status of Jerusalem. Officials say a second round of talks will be held by mid-August. The European Union's top diplomat met with the ousted Egyptian President Mohamed Morsi late Monday local time amid continued violent clashes between security forces and members of Morsi's Muslim Brotherhood. Speaking to reporters following her 2-hour meeting with Morsi, Catherine Ashton said she held frank, in-depth talks with him and felt confident he was well and had access to the latest developments in Egypt. When asked if she knew where he was being held, Ashton said she didn't know. Monday's meeting was the first time a foreign diplomat has had a face-to-face with Morsi after he was put into detention and replaced by a military-backed interim government. The EU has tried to mediate the political turmoil in Egypt for the past 6 months.
It has emerged that the driver in last week's horrific train crash in northwest Spain was speeding and on the phone when the train derailed. Investigators say the train was travelling at over 150 kilometres an hour as it entered the sharp bend, almost twice the speed limit of 80 kilometres an hour. They also say the driver, Francisco Garzon, was also taking a phone call from a member of staff at his rail company to get information about which route he was to take to get to his destination. This latest information comes after court officials, police and the rail company examined the contents of 2 black boxes from the train wreckage. Garzon is suspected of multiple counts of reckless homicide, but he is yet to be formally charged. 79 people were killed and 130 others were injured in the crash. Now, Taekwondo has been called the root of the Korean wave that has swept across the globe, with more than 200 countries now active in the sport. In this second part of our series on Azerbaijan, our Choi You-sun tells us how the government there has helped foster the sport and its athletes.
Azerbaijan is better known to Korea for its natural resources, but it's got greater connections with Seoul, one of them being the Korean martial art of Taekwondo. Around 2,000 Azerbaijanis are active Taekwondo practitioners around the nation. And Gabala, a mountainous city located 4 hours away from the capital Baku, has extra facilities to help the locals hone their skills.
The city of Gabala, a popular tourism destination in Azerbaijan, is turning itself into a Taekwondo hub, attracting prospective athletes from within the region and other parts of the country.
The city even has a sport hotel specifically designed to cater to athletes. This unprecedented facility is also home to Azerbaijan's national team.
Taekwondo is an increasingly popular sport here in Azerbaijan, and we anticipate more young athletes here to achieve victory in the sport. We also send them to Korea and bring our coaches along to improve their skills.
And of course, local children are the first to benefit from these offers. Although mostly beginners, they dream of being the one to win Azerbaijan's first Olympic gold medal in the sport.
I started Taekwondo 2 months ago. I like working out, and I think Taekwondo is good for my health.
I want to start by winning the European Championships, then the Worlds, and eventually the Olympics.
In its bid to develop more Olympic athletes in Taekwondo and in other sports, and eventually hosting international sporting events, Azerbaijan is also building sports infrastructure like this Olympic complex in major cities around the country. Choi You-sun, Arirang News, Gabala.
As more and more people own smartphones now, it's not surprising that a recent study has shown that there are more text messages sent through chat applications than through regular SMS texts. The chat app most commonly used in Korea is KakaoTalk, but now another globally popular app called Line is trying to challenge KakaoTalk's domestic dominance. Our Connie Lee has more.
Sending quick messages, pictures, videos, or even making international phone calls for free. It's all possible with chat apps on smartphones. And one app that is making new headways is Korea's own Line Messenger. The company recently announced that it hit the 200 million download mark, a first for a domestic chat app company. Line, by Korea's NHN Corporation, is fairly new in the chat app field, having launched in June of 2011. But it looks like it is quickly growing, and now has double the number of users than its rival KakaoTalk, which was launched in March of 2010. Just this year alone, the number of Line users has been growing by the tens of millions, already at 100 million downloads in January. The app stands in the top spots in app stores, not only in Southeast Asian countries, but also in South America and Europe. Line, although from a domestic firm, has its main office in Japan, with most of its users also there. In Korea, only 5% of smartphone owners use Line, while 90% use KakaoTalk. Still, in efforts to expand globally, Line officials say they have localized content to meet the wants and needs of the different nations. Connie Lee, Arirang News.
The largest science exhibition here in Korea, the 2013 Korea Science Creativity Festival, kicked off on Tuesday. During the 6-day event, businesses, members of the public, and experts have the chance to try out some amazing inventions that may become everyday devices in the years to come. Our Kim Ji-yeon was there and sent us this report.
From dancing robots to miniature cars that run on hydrogen, state-of-the-art inventions that may become as common as mobile phones in the future are all gathered here at the 2013 Korea Science Creativity Festival, which kicked off on Tuesday. This year's event is hosted by the Ministry of Science, ITC and Future Planning, along with the Korean Foundation for the Advancement of Science and Creativity under the theme Science, Putting Wings to Creativity. More than 300 science institutions from Korea and abroad are participating in this 6-day event featuring more than 400 science programs. This is the most popular corner at the Science Festival, and they're about to scan me for 3D printing. Like this, experts and members of the public can try their hand on some of the most advanced and promising technology of the 21st century. This is a 3D printer designed by a team of Korean engineers. Kevin Cho, the co-founder of 18 Ventures, claims that this printer is far more advanced in terms of speed, design, and quality compared to others.
This 3D printer is up to 10 times faster than other printers because it can go diagonally, while other printers, mostly those made in the U.S., can only move in vertical directions. And speed is a vital part of a printer.
The sheer scale of the event underscores President Park Geun-hye's emphasis on creative economy, or the convergence of science and creative ideas.
We should expect the science sector to become the driving force behind Korea's engine of growth.
The Science Festival is free of charge and runs through Sunday. Kim Ji-yeon, Arirang News, Goyang.
And now let's get a check on the weather with our weathercaster, Lee Ji-yeon, who's standing by at the Weather Center. Good afternoon, Ji-yeon.
Well, good afternoon, guys.
Well, it's peak summer season here in Korea, of course, and a busy time of year for Korea's gateway, Incheon International Airport.
Right. You know what? In fact, about 74,000 travelers will be flying out of Incheon today for destinations overseas, and that's the largest number of people since the airport opened in March 2001.
Well, it seems like the number of overseas travelers increases every year.
Yeah, but you know what? I wish I were one of them. Anyways, here are some of the tips for those of you flying in or out of the airport this season. First, be sure to arrive the airport 3 hours before departure for overseas flights, and airport staff suggested that using the city air terminal and self-check-in services will shorten your check-in times. And lastly, night buses will be running for travelers coming into the airport. Now, enough of airports. Weather-wise, the morning showers have let up in the central region, and the sun is even trying to come out from behind the clouds, and daytime highs should be similar to yesterday, but a heat wave warning is still in place for Daegu, North and South Gyeongsang Province, and some parts of Jeju. Also, a slim chance of rain is in the forecast for those regions in the afternoon as well. Now, tomorrow, mostly sunny skies will dominate the country with a few clouds streaming across the nation, and the daytime highs will be similar to today's. Now, back to today's forecast. Right now, the rain clouds are slowly moving down south, and the humidity this afternoon will be 87% on average. So with that, let's take a closer look at today's readings. Now, Daegu will get up to 33 degrees Celsius today, while Seoul and Busan will hike up to 30 degrees Celsius, that's 86 degrees Fahrenheit. Now let's see how other regions are looking. It looks like Jeju will have a blistering day, while Mount Kumgang will be 10 degrees cooler than Jeju at 25. Now that wraps up the weather forecast for me today. Now let's send it back to Mark and Yoo-sun in the studio.
Thank you as always, Jian, for your weather report, and those are the stories we're following at this hour.
Join us again tomorrow at noon Korea time.